a love of God, a love for one another in ways of peace. And so our format tonight will be, I'll give an opportunity for our three of these faith leaders. I'm not going to speak so much about Christianity because that's the main religion in our day, and I might give a context if you have questions, but I think it's more to find. This is Dorje Kelley with the Beth-El Zehr. He's the education director. Muzaffar Ahmad, which is, he's also he's part of the Ahmadiyyan community in the Muslim tradition, and he's the president of the Fishers Multi-Faith Compassion Interfaith Group. And then, of course, again, Dorje, who's there in the Buddhist Center in Castleton. They will give a 10 to 12, 13-minute kind of presentation, whatever they like, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. We'll try to be done at 7:30 for those who want to go, but then we'll have an extra 15 minutes that you can have some question and answer if you didn't get your questions asked in that time, because the library, they try to get people leaving by 15 till 8. But we do want to, as they have, and they'll have their first presentations, and then I'll just be a moderator to facilitate the questions. And as long as they're all respectful and we're good together, it'll be wonderful. So we felt like, because Buddhism is the oldest of our faith traditions that are here. Of course, Hinduism was probably the earliest ones, have the earliest writings, the Veda scriptures that come out of India. But Buddha, who was enlightened there in India, and Buddhism. And so we'll let Dorje, again, for some of you know, you'll have rabbi, which is in the Jewish tradition, teacher, reverend in the Christian tradition. Sometimes in the Catholic, it's priest or father. A lot of times I just go by Pastor Jerry or Reverend Jerry. But again, is the same as that form. It's a teacher. So again, Dorje is your first name, but again, is that way of that. So why don't you give us a little of your presentation, a little dress, anything you want.
Wonderful. Well,
Stand. But why don't you stand?
Stand?
Okay.
Stand throughout the talk?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they can't see you as well.
But, it's kind of like I feel that I'm doing a TED Talk, so I need a microphone.
I can arrange that.
I'll need like Madonna and have Anyway, so okay, I'll stand. I'm not usually used to standing and talking. However, when Reverend Jerry was introducing me and I was talking about oldest, he figured out I am the oldest on the panel here. So when he said the oldest religion, I thought he was talking about me being the oldest person. So welcome. I'm very happy to be here. I think that it's wonderful that there's so much interest in faith, traditions, diversity, and also respect. So I think the important thing to understand is that we're not all meant to be the same. How boring would that be? Even within Buddhist traditions, there are different ways of thinking, different lineages, different teachings. As Buddhism moves to different countries, it often adapts to the culture of that country. And I think what's really wonderful is that we need to learn to enjoy and respect diversity, the uniqueness of each group and what they have to offer. What someone wants to do from their own side in terms of how they practice, that is their business. How they want to practice, how they want to enjoy their faith, practice their faith, or if they don't want to have any faith. We have a lot of people come to our center and they say, well, I don't believe in anything. I said, that's great, come on in. Because ultimately, what Buddhist teachings are about is how to understand, control, and transform our own mind. Because what Buddha understood is that it is our mind that is creating all our experiences. How do you experience me right now? Not from the point of view from the person sitting next to you. You understand me, you experience me from your own point of view, from your own mind. Well, if you think about that, the only way you know yourself, know others, and know the world is how? Through your own mind, your own thoughts. And it's through that we create either our happiness or our misery. So if you wonder why we are miserable or we have a difficult or conflicted or impure world, All you have to do is look at your mind. Sorry, that was a joke. I mean, it's the truth. But it is kind of, we want to get out of this conflict, don't we? We don't want to be in a conflicted world. We want to live in a peaceful world. We want to be able to get along with each other. We want to care for our friends and our family. We want to be able to everyone to enjoy the good things that we have, that are here. So the only way we're going to be able to do that is to change our thought, change our view, change our attitude, change our mind. Through changing your mind, you change your experience of yourself, others, and the world. What are we supposed to change it to? Now, I know I only have a few minutes, and this is going to sound so simple. And it's almost embarrassing how simple it is. But I assure you, if you put this one thing into practice, you will change your entire experience of yourself, others, and even the world. Whatever happens to you personally, in your community, in the world, whatever happens, whatever you experience, if you choose to view it as positive, whatever it is, whatever change or challenge you might have, whatever difficulty you might have, whatever argument you have with Aunt Louise, who you can't really stand, you have to invite her over anyway, Whatever the difficulty is, even a diagnosis you don't like, or a criticism you don't like, whatever it is, all you need to do is how can I see this in a positive way? How can I see this as beneficial? How can I approach this and learn from it and grow from it? In that way, you begin to do what Buddhist teachings are about. Understand your mind, control your mind. So your mind is producing your well-being and happiness. Your mind becomes your protection through developing positive states of mind, rather than allowing ourselves out of ignorance to hold negative states of mind, anger, fear, resentment, intolerance, blame. Poor Aunt Tilly, she can't help being who she is, right? Forgive her. Like her, find something good about her, and besides, if nothing else, she can produce for you a patient mind. If you are not patient in this world, you are just going to be angry every moment of the day. If you can't accept, if you're not patient, what else do we need to do? Because if you want to understand our mind, so we understand our mind because our mind is producing all our experiences. I don't like what I'm experiencing, and what we normally do is we try to change everything outside of our mind. Do you ever try to do that? You try to change your partner's mind, right? For like 25 and a half years. And you haven't given up. It's time to give it up. Start trying to change the external situations. And we won't ignore external situations, but we see ultimately what we need to do is change our view, change our attitude, change our perspective. And then it's amazing, everything changes. Because then it will function for you in that way. So we learn to understand our mind is producing everything. We learn to control our mind rather than just going through the path of least resistance. How easy it is to get irritated. How easy it is to get angry. How easy it is to get fearful. How easy it is to blame everybody else for your difficulties and problems. That's what we do. And as a result, we experience suffering. So what would it be like to be able to control your mind so that you produce a thought, an idea that will be more beneficial and helpful? How can I develop patience? And did I say patience already? How can I develop patience? And how can I develop more patience? When I first met Buddhist teachings, I was really attracted to the teachings on love and compassion. And I really did not understand that patience was a virtue. And what I understand, without patience, it's very hard to love. Without patience, it's very hard to have compassion. We need to learn how to accept difficulties, and we need to learn how to transform difficulties into our path. So how do you transform your mind? So understand your mind, control your mind, transform your mind. How do you actually transform your mind? The only way to do that is through inner development, inner technology, changing your thoughts, your ideas from what? Negative to positive. And as I said, this is so simple. Don't do it. You're so familiar with the misery, the pain. It's much easier to blame someone else and to take responsibility for our own thoughts and minds and actions, that we just take the path of least resistance. And if I'm unhappy, it must be your fault. Makes sense, right? I was doing fine until you came along. I was doing fine until this government change. I was doing fine until this. It's not true. What is producing your happiness or your misery is the thoughts that you hold within your own heart, within your own mind. And through that, you create your experience of the world. So ultimately, what Buddhist teachings are about is that we learn to understand our mind, control our mind, and transform our mind. Transform our mind so our mind itself becomes our refuge, becomes our protection. You do it through spiritual development, developing states of mind that are positive. Patience, loving kindness, pure love for every living being, compassion for every living being. There is no one born who doesn't experience suffering. They're just like you. And for that reason alone, you can learn to love and respect every living being because they are just like you. The other thing, I think I might be out of time. I told you I only wanted like 5 minutes.
No, I know.
Once I get wound up and start to stop. Anyway, one thing I wanted to say, I think this is really important, because I'm a Buddhist monk. I'm a resident teacher for Kadampa Meditation Center in Indianapolis. We have a location in Castleton. But, you know, I wasn't born a Buddhist monk. When people see me, they think somehow I popped out of the room with these clothes. I said, yeah, it would have been nice, but it didn't happen that way. And I'm so grateful for, I grew up Catholic, and I'm so grateful for that. But the thing that's important to understand, as a Buddhist, I am not trying to convert, evangelize, say anyone, you know, this is it. Oh, I'll tell you a quick story. I was traveling recently, and on the way back to Indianapolis, I was sitting next to a woman, and she was really amazing. She was so bright, she was kind of like sort of sleeping like this, but she would ask me these questions. Very direct about, like, what am I wearing, what am this, what about that, and it's really good questions. And then all of a sudden she said to me, she said this in a slow voice, she says, so, do you think Buddhism is a superior religion? And I said, of course not. You know, because whatever is moving you towards more well-being, more happiness, more connection to others, whatever that is, go for it, whatever faith it is. And she was very happy about that. You know, because no one needs anything pushed down their throat. Everyone has freedom, everyone has choice. So like when I got interested in Buddhism, I wasn't interested in becoming a Buddhist. I just wanted some peace of mind, and I heard about meditation. So one of the main things that we do is engage in meditation to observe the mind and see what the mind is doing, so you can control it, understand it, control it, and transform it. And so anyway, I just want to say that as a point, that I love Buddhism. I love what I do. I love where I came from, and there's no conversion in Buddhism. You know, you can't convert to be a Buddhist. You know, what happens is if you're following Buddhist teachings and you're putting them into practice in your life, and you really like them, and you join a community, guess what? You're a Buddhist. But no one can make you a Buddhist. I think it's just really important to understand. Let's see, I don't know, I can probably go on, but I'm going to take this opportunity to stop.
Okay, but I do want you to speak about reincarnation, because that is a principle.
Oh, is this the question part?
No, on my thing, I want you to we'll do that. But we'll have time, but reincarnation is an important aspect in Buddhism.
It's an important aspect in most religions, though, because most religions believe that there is something that happens beyond this life.
Yes.
So I don't think it's very unique. What always makes me nervous about that question, I love Pastor Jerry, you know, is that, oh, you mean you're going to tell me I'm going to be born as a dog or an ant or an alligator or whatever? And it's like, this is what happens when I go to a high school. They hear little stories about, reincarnation and stuff like that. And, the people ask, and they can't even imagine how, in a future life, how they could take a lower rebirth, And it's very, challenging from one point of view. The thing that I think is important to understand that most religions believe that after this life is over, something is going to happen to you. And it's either going to be good or bad.
Right.
I never hear much neutral things,
Right.
It's either going to be good or bad. And all the religions are telling you that if you are a faith person, if you're engaging in spiritual life, spiritual life is developing states of mind that are positive. An actual spiritual life is being concerned about where you are going. Because we are producing our future happiness or future misery by the actions we're engaging in now. So a lot of people don't want to think about future lives. They think there's a future left to this life, right? So what you do today is going to produce your happiness or misery next month, next year, 10 years from now, if you live that long. But when you understand the continuum of thought, the continuum of mind, you realize our mind is there's no beginning or end to our mind. Isn't that extraordinary when you really think about it? I have to tell you, the first time I heard that, I wasn't sure about it. But when I began to understand that I'm going to be with this mind for a long time, I better clean it up. Because this mind is either going to produce my happiness in the future as being reborn in a pure land, or being reborn in more misery, in any form that's possible. So I don't want that, and I don't think anyone wants that. Everyone wants future happiness and well-being. But I don't want to get people freaked out, oh my goodness, what am I going to do when I'm like wagging my tail and stuff like that. And I live with 2 dogs. I mean, they have 4 legs, and I love them, and they're so wonderful. And I just walk in, I pet them, and I tell you, oh, I love you, it's great. I love you, but I want to be like you. So anyway.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's give a mark. And one of the other aspects, and I'll let people talk about, but as karma is part of that, it's interesting because, Jesus speaks about you reap what you sow. The principle of karma, what you put out comes back, is again something that's in all of our faith traditions. And karma is the big word now people use, and they like it, but it really is something, again, that is in all of our faith traditions. And we can talk more about reincarnation. It's interesting, some of the early Christian writers talked about reincarnation, and then they got pushed away when the Catholic Church set set what they're going to talk about. But anyway, it's a thing, just interesting. Now, George Kelley, please come, and we're so glad. He's from Bethel Zedek, and he's the education director there. And so he's been a university professor teaching, but he's been here now for 10 years. In and out.
20 years?
20 years, thank you. So anyhow, George.
I was very young. So, in the 1st century before the Common Era, so the 1st century before the time of Jesus, a Roman soldier came up to one of the great sages of the Sanhedrin, named Shammai, and said, "Teach me all of Judaism while I stand on one foot." Shammai hit him with a stick and sent him away. So then he went to another great sage, Hillel, and said, "Teach me all of Judaism while I stand on one foot." And Hillel says, "What you find hateful for yourself, don't do to anybody else. Everything else is commentary, now go and study." Sometimes when I have to do these things, I feel like I'm trying to teach all of Judaism while standing on one foot. And so you're not going to understand Judaism when I'm done talking. You're going to understand a little bit about me, for good or bad. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Judaism is, but I'm hoping more to talk later if you have questions. So what is Judaism? Well, in the ancient Near East, a person named Abraham heard the voice of an invisible God, a singular God that was unique and alone, and started to gather people together. His children and his children's children and a bunch of children from that guy named Jacob became the people of Israel. And then they moved into a land that is now called Israel. It was called Canaan in the ancient world, Canaan, and started a tradition. And originally, you can read about it in the Bible, it's all there, where there is sacrifices and there is a priestly class and all this, and all that is great and none of that matters anymore. Well, it does, because it's the foundation of who we are. The Torah, the story of the first 5 books of the Bible, is who we are. That's the foundation of what it means to be Jewish. But none of that is what Judaism is today. Because Judaism, like every other faith tradition, has evolved over time. Now, we've had a talk about reincarnation. Early Jewish thinkers, back in the ancient world, they believed in reincarnation. And there's a lot of talk about that. Not so much part of it today. But what happened is that in the year 70 of the Common Era, so in the 1st century, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed and the Jews are sent out. So by the 2nd century, Jews are outside of the land of Israel. There's no longer temple sacrifice, and they create a method of being Jewish that involves the home and these collection of these community centers called synagogues. And so we evolved from a sacrificial cult to a prayer-based model, and that takes off. And for the next 2 millennia, that develops with commentary and stories and rabbis making rules, and then for all over the world, and literally all over the world, Jews have lived. They have influenced the cultures that they lived in, and those cultures have influenced them. And so you probably know a bunch of Jewish-like words. You probably eat Jewish foods. How many people had a bagel this morning? You know? How many people have ever schlepped something? Or called someone a schmendrick. Let me tell you, that's not a good out loud word. But the thing is that these cultures interacted with each other. Because Judaism is not just a religion. It is more than a religion. One of the great teachers of Judaism in the 20th century, and someone whose teachings I follow, a rabbi named Mordecai Kaplan, said Judaism is an evolving religious civilization. So religion is a piece of it, but everything a Jew does is Jewish. And there are Jews who don't believe in God at all. And there are Jews who would never do a single racial practice. And then there are Jews who try to follow all of the commandments that were found in the Torah. Anyone know how many commandments the rabbis found in the Torah? Anyone want to guess?
Over 600?
Over 600. It was 613. Now about 275 of them don't matter anymore because they revolve around the temple, and then there's some you can't do because they only happen when the Messiah comes and all. But there's still a whole lot of commandments. And some of them are incredibly silly. Like, don't place a stumbling block before a blind person. It's actually in the Bible. You can find it. I promise you. Leviticus. How many people here want to trip blind people? Why do we need that? Seriously. I mean, yeah, maybe if you did a comedy routine, but why did the Bible have to tell us not to trip blind people? Well, the rabbis said, nah, that's not really what it means. It means don't make it easy for someone else to transgress. The Bible teaches us through this poetry that is the Torah that we have a responsibility to other people too. And that's part of who we are. So there are a whole bunch of what we call mitzvot, these commandments in the Bible. Some of them are ritual, and some of them make sense. Some of them don't make sense. Like you probably hear Jews don't eat milk and meat together. And that was because there are 3 times, I think it's 3 times, maybe 2, there are 3 times in the Torah, where it says don't boil a baby animal in its mother's milk. Just think about that. That the Bible tells us not to take a calf from a cow and then slaughter it and then boil it in its own mother's milk. Why would the Bible tell us that? Because it's freaking cruel. Think about it. The Bible cares about what a cow thinks about what's happening to its child. That's pretty powerful stuff. But the rabbis got a hold of it and said, well, we didn't want you to get close to doing that, so now you can't have milk and meat at the same meal. In fact, you have to have two separate sets of dishes. So there's a joke. Moses said on the mountain with God, and God says, don't boil a baby animal in its mother's milk. And Moses says, does that mean I have to have two sets of dishes, one for when I have milk and one for I have meat? And God says, don't boil a baby animal in its mother's milk. And Moses said, does that mean I have to wait 4 hours after eating meat before I can eat any dairy? And God says, don't boil a baby animal in its mother's milk. And Moses said, does that mean I have to have all my food checked to make sure it doesn't have traces of each other in it and have little marks on it? Trust me, you buy a lot of food that has a little Jewish mark on it. It tells me how I can eat it. And God says, go, have it your way. And the phone rings, it's God. But the thing is that Judaism has been a religion that has tried to help people live. The way I talk about it, it is a culturally constructed faith tradition of how to be a good neighbor. And then it has all this stuff to make you unique in a world. Remember, this is the ancient Near East. This is a tribal time. So it creates opportunities for people to be distinct. And I believe distinction is important. What feeds your mind? What feeds your heart? What feeds who you are? It's going to be different from what feeds me. And that was true in the ancient Near East. It's true today. And I think that's why some people look at Judaism and say, oh, they have all these rules you have to follow. The thing is, that those rules are sort of the guideposts. You know, we have highways in this country. That's where you drive. You drive on one side, you don't drive on the other. But when we built the freeway and we separate who's coming in what direction, then we go really fast to where we're going. Not too fast, because police officers. But you can go a lot faster on a freeway than you can on a two-lane road. But there's still guideposts. And the Torah and these rules give us the guideposts for us to move through life more quickly. And the thing is that the Torah and God, and even the rabbis, they had a lot of time on their hands, so they wrote a lot. They want us to be happy. Judaism is a celebration of life. While some faith traditions think about what's happening next, Judaism spends a lot of time thinking about what's happening now. What can I do to make the world a better place for me being in it? That's it. That's Judaism. I can tell you about how there are Orthodox Jews and there are Reformed Jews and there are Reconstructionist Jews and there are conservative Jews, and I can go on for, and I usually do, because people pay me money to do that. But the thing is that that's not what you need to know. What you need to know is that Jews operate in a world where they are guided by a set of principles that is supposed to make the world a better place. And because of that, they sometimes operate in many different ways to do that, and you should know that. If you know a Jew, you know a Jew. You don't know Judaism. Because you met me tonight, and I'm a very different Jew than even the person I'm married to. So the thing is that what Judaism wants to be is a tradition that celebrates the fact that, oh my goodness, this universe is amazing. And you can believe that God created this universe through words, because that's what the Torah tells you. But in the end, God said, hey, now it's your turn. You add to this wonderful creation, and you make it even more wonderful. And that's what Judaism is all about. So, I don't know what else you want to know. It's really hard to do something in 12 minutes. And I'm going to take a couple more, because I'm a teacher. I like to hear myself talk. But the thing is, like, we tell these stories, and we continue to perpetuate who we are as a people, because we think it's important. We also birthed two of the largest religions on the planet, so we're pretty happy about that too. Our children are really cool. They're the prom king and queen. I didn't say that. But I'll tell you something about Judaism. It's owned by the people. So I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. So I'm going to tell you one story. You all know, probably, because it's part of sort of Western culture, the story of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds by the Israelites as they left Mitzrayim, as they left Egypt. And it's the Sea of Reeds, people. I can read Hebrew. Trust me. It says Sea of Reeds. So the story is pretty simple in the Torah. Moses holds a staff out of the water. A wind blows all night long, and suddenly the sea splits. It seems pretty weird. Why does the wind blow all night long? And then suddenly the sea splits. Well, the rabbi said, see, there was this kid. He's not so much a kid, he's about 20-something, named Nachshon. He was a prince in the tribe of Yehudah, of Judah. And he walked out into the water because God had said, you'll be free. So he sees the water in front of him, and he sees the Egyptians coming. He's figuring, something's going to happen. So he walks out, and the water starts coming up his ankles. This means as he's chanting, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nadar ba'kodesh. Who is like you, Adonai? Who can be compared to you? Now, if you've ever seen Prince of Egypt, the cartoon movie about that, crossing the sea reeds, if you listen closer, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing those waters. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Well, the water comes up to his waist, and the water comes up to his chest, and the water comes up to his chin, and he's still singing. So in fact, if you look on the page, the word Nichamoka is repeated twice, but it's two different sets of letters, because the second time he sang it, the last time he was singing it, there was water going into his mouth. So instead of saying Nichamoka, he said Nichamoka, because he was choking on the water going in. And as the water gets up to his nose, the sea splits. That's a midrash. That's a story about the story in the Torah, and it tells us a lot about who the Jewish people are. We don't sit back and wait for God to do for us. We are partners with God to make the world a better place. And Nachshon showed faith and walked into the water. And because Nachshon went out into the water, that's how the miracle happened. So I will leave you with that little piece of story, and later I hope we have time for questions. We go from there.
Fantastic. Thank you. I do want to, as Christianity is kind of the third in the lineage of this, I grew up in a very, my Amish Mennonite, my grandparents were, and we were taught that you take the Bible literally. And we take every word literally, the Bible literally. Now what I came to realize is you can't take the Bible literally, because if you did, you know, we don't stone people like they had some verse in Leviticus that they have markings on their skin for our tattoos. We don't have slaves. We don't take out one eye. And in fact, the story that George gave to us was a story that had a deep meaning to it. And I found that people, when they say we take the Bible literally, what they mean is I take certain verses literally, and if you don't agree with me, then you're not a Christian like me. And a lot of times ministers would use the Bible as a thing to make their point of view and almost diminish other points of view. And a challenge, because when you realize that we all look at scriptures with different points of view, we all have evolved in our culture in time. We no longer see mental illness as we saw possessed by demons at one point. Now we see schizophrenia in a certain way. People who we thought were born into sin were certain things. And so I want us to make sure that we realize Jesus was a Jew. He came from Jewish lineage. And in fact, the teachings of Jesus were not all of the teachings of the church. The church, Paul and Peter, who then evolved, and we had the Catholic Church and all the doctrines, were doctrines that were evolved to try to have an understanding of Jesus. if you would like to, and I'm suggesting, just as an alternative, if you would like to look at some things in a different way, James and the brothers of Jesus were called the Jerusalem Christians, Jews and Christians. And there's writings about the Jesus dynasty. There are writings about that group who saw Jesus not as divine, but saw him bringing in the Messianic age. They followed him. But because Peter and Paul were the more dominant, that voice got lost. That group moved on and diminished, and Peter and Paul became then the Catholic Church. And that was and we had many different forms of teaching about Jesus. But then in 325 AD is when they had the Nicene Creed, the council, and they decided we need to have a definition of who Jesus was and what's in the Bible. And that's when the Bible got put together. Some of the books, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, some of those did get in the Bible, but books like Revelation, which almost didn't get in, but got in because politically there was a bishop who wanted it. So we became the canon. But the language that we used was the Old Testament and the New Testament, already setting up a diminishing of the Jewish faith. So let me say, and this is very important, the Jews did not kill Jesus. And the reason why that's important is because that's been something that's perpetuated a lot of the anti-Semitic teaching. There was a teaching when we said the Jews killed Jesus, and so that's what Hitler did. We have to get rid of the Jews because they killed Jesus. No. Caiaphas, one who was a Pharisee, he was a religious leader of that day, who was in position with Pilate, they were threatened by Jesus, but not all the Pharisees were. And in fact, a lot of the teaching, all the teaching of Jesus came from the Jewish faith. He didn't bring us anything new. Love your enemies was in the Jewish faith. All the teaching that he brought though in a new way, bringing it out to people beyond the Jewish tradition. He was bringing the gospel, the love of God, to beyond. So I'm not going to get into all of that within the Christian faith in our theology, but I think it's important that we have that understanding, and ministers can perpetuate an anti-Semitism. And we need to realize that Christians and ministers, we have been a part of perpetuating that. And so I say I'm sorry, and on the behalf of all those who have, because anti-Semitism has risen 47% in the last 2 years in our country. And my friends who are both for Muslims and Jewish, who have felt the fear of swastikas put on the temple, and my Muslim friends who have been threatened with terrible things, breaks my heart. Because for me, the teaching of Jesus, they said to him, what was the greatest commandment? And he said to love God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the greatest commandment. If you follow that, you've covered a multitude of sins. And I can make a case for all the teaching of Jesus, of how he reached out to Samaritan woman, to people, and loved them and gave them dignity, and that we as Christians, and I believe, are to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that means all of our neighbors. So I offer that to you, and we can have more conversation. But I want to now let my friend Muzaffar speak to us about Islam. This is the handout for you that a friend of ours, Dr. Shahid Attar, made after 9/11. It's a little disorganized in the flip-flop, the way the PDF thing got printed, but it does some of the things. And then we'll go from there. But Muzaffar?
Thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you for our host here for organizing this wonderful event. Welcome you all to the library. My name is Muzaffar Ahmad, the most difficult name in the room today. Distinction. I live in Fishers. I'm an IT professional, so I'm a little different than the rest of the leaders sitting here. I'm not a rabbi or a priest or an imam, but I'm passionate about educating and introducing the different religions to different people. So I was born into the Islamic faith, so I'm here to represent Islam. I'll tell you a little bit about the religion of Islam, what Muslims believe in, and what I'm really looking forward to is really more of a interaction, question and answer. So even during my 15 minutes, if you have a question, stop me and I'll be happy to try to answer that. I feel like it's the conversation that's more important than what I can just do in a one-way conversation. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Pakistan. I came to the US in '98 after I completed my computer science education, got married, had our first daughter. I now have two daughters. One is becoming a pharmacist, and the younger one is in 8th grade. And my wife and two daughters, we live in Fishers. So I started working in the IT field in '98, and most of you probably know that was the Y2K era. So I got a call from the US, say, hey, you know how to turn this thing on called computer? I said, yep, I do. I got on a phone interview, they asked me 6 questions. 3 of them I had no clue what he was asking me because the accent was so different. So out of the next 3, I answered 2 incorrectly, and he said, you're hired. That must be a fraud, he's tricking me. But I was hired, I came to the US, saved the world from Y2K bug, and decided to stay. So I'm glad to be here. That's my background. About the religion of Islam, I am part of a small sect within the larger Muslim community called the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which is a sect that is persecuted pretty heavily by religious extremists like ISIS and Taliban and other folks. So I've seen how religion is used, misused, and abused by political motives or by racial motives or whatever drive people together. I've seen the dark side. So that's really my passion, is to tell people, you know what, your religion is pretty cool. And it's probably because your parents were following that religion. But try to learn, try to know the others. And I've done that a lot after coming to the US. I've met a lot of my cool friends here from other religions. And I've learned that different faith groups have more in common than they have different. So I'm a science person. I see different religions as different operating systems. You know, your computers, you run Windows 98 or Windows 7 or Windows 9. Or somebody said, no, Apple is the coolest thing. Windows sucks. And iPhone versus Android. And my thought is, you know, under the hood, it's really that operating system that's designed to run the machine. And that's how I look at religions. They are the operating systems designed to make this hardware, the human hardware, work, and to guide us how to live our lives. And it's really my passion that drives me. So I'm going to stop talking with generics a little bit and talk a little more about Islam. One thing I would like to learn is how Muslims greet each other. Before we go there, how many of you actually know a Muslim? Show me your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's not bad. I feel like that's the best way to learn about religion. Is really find out somebody who's a follower of that religion, and then you'll really find out what that religion is about. Just hearing me talk or listening to a radio show or a YouTube video, you'll only get part of the story. Okay, so how do Muslims greet each other when they meet? Does anybody know? Other than you, you don't know. Or learn. So when Muslims meet each other, they say, Assalamu alaikum. Let's try to repeat that. Assalamu alaikum. That means, may peace be upon you. That's an Arabic word, and that's one of the very few things that are common in Muslims all around the world. So whether there's a Muslim in Pakistan or Pendleton or somewhere in between, whether they speak Arabic or not, I don't speak Arabic, but this is a typical greeting, that when Muslims meet each other, they say, Assalamu alaikum, and the word means, may peace be upon you. And the reply is, Wa alaikum assalam. Let's try that. Wa alaikum assalam. That means may peace be on you as well. So if that's the only thing you learned from my talk, I think my purpose has been met. Okay, so what is Islam? Islam is the name of a religion. It is the latest of the three Abrahamic faiths. So Judaism is the oldest Abrahamic faith, then comes Christianity, and then comes Islam. And I say it's part of Abrahamic faith is because Muslims believe in Prophet Abraham as a prophet of God. And through his lineage came many prophets, and the last of those we believe was Prophet Muhammad. So Muslims, I'm a Muslim, so Muslim is the follower who follows the religion of Islam. So Islam is the religion, similar to Christianity is a religion, similarly Islam is a religion. Follower of Christianity is called Christian, so followers of Islam are called Muslims. So that's who I am. So Islam started around 1400 years ago. Where was the birthplace of Islam? Any idea? Saudi Arabia. Currently, Middle East, Saudi Arabia, that's where the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, was born and living. When he was born as an orphan, he never learned how to read or write. He was a shepherd most of his life, turned into a businessman, and when he reached about 40 years old, he really was a person who believed in meditation a lot. So he used to go into a mountain cave near his house and meditate for several hours a day, and one day he heard a voice where God was telling him to read. And he got really scared, and he told that voice, I don't know how to read, I'm illiterate. And that's when he got more revelations, and he really got scared for his life. He thought he's going crazy. And he was trembling and shivering, and he came home and told his wife, I think I'm going crazy, I'm gonna die. And she consoled him, covered him up, took him to one of her cousins who was a Christian, who was an intelligent person. So she took Muhammad to a cousin, he was a Christian, and when he heard his story, he thought, it seems like you're hearing from God and you're the prophet that we're waiting for. So that's just the background of how he became, he knew that he was a prophet. So he was around 40 years old, he claimed to be the prophet of Islam. So what do Muslims believe in the scripture? Do you know what's the name of the scripture of Islam? Quran. Very good. So Quran is the name of the book that all Muslims read and believe in. We believe that Quran contains the literal word of God, which was revealed to Prophet Muhammad during his lifetime. So Prophet Muhammad, after claiming to be the prophet, lived for another 25 years or so. And during those 25 years, he used to get revelations, one verse at a time, multiple verses at a time, and he used to tell his companions to write them down or to memorize them. And those verses compiled, that's what Quran is. And it's in the language of Arabic, which is still a living language. So in my house, I should have brought a copy. But when you open the book of Quran, you see Arabic, the original scripture, the original script as part of it. So Islam, Muslims, Prophet Muhammad, book is Holy Quran. What else? What do Muslims believe in? So Muslims are the second largest religion in the world. Christianity is the biggest. If you consider all the people who are following a particular religion, then Christianity is the biggest religion in the world. Islam is the second biggest, followed by other religions. So all Muslims believe in 5 basic concepts. One is that there's only one God. So just like Judaism, Islam also believes that there's only one God, and Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet of God. Muslims believe in praying 5 times a day. the Prophet Muhammad told his companions to meditate a lot. So every Muslim is supposed to pray 5 times a day to the minute. You can pray more, but every Muslim is advised that you should pray 5 times a day at a specific time, one early in the morning, one before going to bed, one in the middle part of the day, like lunch hour, and then twice, once in the afternoon, once when the sun goes down. So that's another special thing about Muslims, that we have a very structured praying system or a meditation process. So we talked about one God, praying 5 times a day. Muslims are supposed to fast, not eat or drink anything from morning till the sunset during the month of Ramadan. How many of you have heard about Ramadan? Quite a bit. Yeah, it's a famous word. So that's 1 month in a year, which is coming up in April. I will be fasting most days. I'm supposed to fast all days, but it's really difficult not to eat or drink anything all day and then go to work. So Muslims believe in one God. Muslims pray 5 times a day. Muslims fast during the month of Ramadan. Muslims do charity. It's called zakat, which, George, I heard that there's some similar word in Jewish faith about zakat.
Yeah.
Or sadaqah.
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 Basically, it's a
Righteousness.
sadaqah, yes. So zakat is an Arabic word which means that Muslims are supposed to do charity, help those who are in need. And the 5th pillar is pilgrimage. So Muslims, once in their lifetime, are supposed to go to the holy land of Islam, which is currently Saudi Arabia, and participate in a pilgrimage. So those are the 5 things that Muslims do. Another important thing I want you to know is that Muslims believe in all prophets, starting from Adam, Abraham, to Moses, to Noah, to Jacob, and Jesus is considered a very special prophet in Islam. In the holy book, Quran, there is a chapter that's named after Mary. So if you open the book of Quran, you will find that one of the chapters is named after the mother of Jesus, Mary. So all Muslims regard Jesus as a very special prophet, just like Muhammad is considered a very special prophet. So I feel like that's an important concept that a lot of Christians don't know, that Muslims revere and respect Jesus in a big way. I'm running out of time. I had a few notes. I'm going to make sure I don't miss anything important. How to be sensitive and respectful to a Muslim. That's something very important. So Muslims don't eat pork. Muslims don't drink alcohol. And Muslims really don't gamble, go to casinos and things like that. So if you're around a Muslim and sharing a meal, tell them if the food has pork in it, they will appreciate it. They don't drink. And Muslims also don't draw pictures of God. That's why you've probably never seen the picture of Prophet Muhammad or picture of God. Prophet Muhammad told his followers that don't draw my picture, because he was worried that people will start to worship that picture and raise it to the level of God. So he said, no pictures allowed. So Muslims usually don't draw pictures of God or the Prophet Muhammad. And Muslims treat the Holy Quran very respectfully. So if I had a book, I would not put it on the ground. I would put it on the table or someplace that's clean. So that's just some information about Muslims. So the biggest holidays that Muslims celebrate is called Eid, E-I-D. And it is one day that marks the end of the month of Ramadan. So the Ramadan is going to start in April, and at the end of Ramadan in May will be the biggest Muslim holiday called Eid. And that's where so the tradition, at least in Pakistan, was that on that day, kids used to get prizes, just like Christmas here. The difference is that here, kids actually get gifts wrapped, put under the tree. In Pakistan, on the day of Eid, the tradition is kids get cash. So that morning, we used to go to the mosque, do the prayers, come home, and then there's usually a gathering where all the families getting together. So the goal was to hit the richest uncle first. Because he's gonna give you the biggest cap, you know? And the poor uncles we can hit at the end, but make sure Uncle so-and-so is hit first. So that's how kids celebrate Eid. And again, it's very similar, whether it's Christmas in the US or Eid in Pakistan, families get together, food, kids get gifts, and the elders talk and sometimes fight because we argue. That's what the older people do. That's pretty much it. I'm going to stop here, but if you have questions, we'll be here.
Muzaffar, two things I want us to, while we're still here, and then we'll open up for questions. But jihad has been thrown around a lot. People will say there's a jihad against the West and some of these political leaders. I think it's important for us to realize that like the ISIS took scriptures from the Quran to justify their actions, and so people would say, you know, Islam was a religion of violence, which I know it's not, and you know, but the understanding, and help me if I'm correct, that again, they were taking the scriptures out of context. For that scripture, Muhammad was speaking of that time and how they were to protect themselves for infidels. Speak just a little bit about that, how ISIS or other groups maybe have taken the scriptures of the Quran out of context.
Absolutely, good point. So you hear a lot about Islamic terrorism, radical Islamic terrorism, and Muslims doing crazy things all over the world. I feel like Islam is going through a tough phase. All religions have gone through that phase. KKK used Christianity as their symbol. They used to carry a cross. ISIS and Taliban use Islam, and they cause a lot of damage. But do you know what religion ISIS kills the most? Muslims. If ISIS can kill one Christian, they probably kill 100 Muslims who are in their way. Because majority of the Muslims know these are crazy folks. They just use religion because they don't have anything better to do. And that's how they can rally the people behind it. Hey, you're a Muslim, come with us, let's kill these Americans or these French or these type of Muslims. My brother, who was part of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, was killed. Why was he killed? Because he was wrong kind of a Muslim. He did not believe in what these radicals thought the true teaching of Islam is. So Islam, in my opinion, is no more violent than any other religion. In fact, I feel like Islam is less violent because it does not prescribe stoning as a punishment or things like that, which has been associated to it. There are some verses in the Quran that says, kill the infidel wherever you find them. So what ISIS do is say, look, there's a verse here that says, kill the infidels wherever you find them. What they don't do is read two verses before it and two verses after it, which are talking about a time when Muslims were being attacked by infidels. So it's talking about that time, that war, you're supposed to defend yourself. Don't just sit down and say, okay, come and kill me. And then it says, if your attackers stop attacking you, don't harm them. So that's the context that Jerry was saying, that people take things out of context, they abuse them, and then they use them for their benefits and create a lot of disorder. But I assure you that majority of Muslims in the world are peaceful, and they want the same thing in life as you and I.
There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. There are maybe 10,000 were ISIS. But who got all the coverage? And part of what happened was our media, our coverage, those things, we never heard about when the Muslims came and stood, you know, with the Jewish people in their way, or they did things for the Christians over in one of the countries where the Christians were going to be, some of the ISIS were coming after them, I think it was in Egypt, and the Muslims surrounded the Christians that were there, protected them against, right? But we never hear those stories here, because they don't sell money, and a lot of the thing is there's a lot of Islamic phobia in this country because of how it came after 9/11. People forget that the ones who killed 9/11 killed Muslims, were in the the Twin Towers, as well as many other people. And so, you know, if you only watch certain news stations, and they're both sides, you know, you don't really know until you meet somebody. And so I appreciate any of those up for sharing. Let's give it a And I think as Muzaffar said, the best thing you can do is ask somebody questions, you know? Somebody's a Muslim or Buddhist and say, look, this sounds like a silly question, but why do you wear the yarmulke? Or what is that on your head, right?
What is that on
So
my
what
head?
is that on your head?
What is this?
And do all Jewish men wear a yarmulke all the time? Or so share me.
Really have to.
I want you to say that.
So yarmulke is a Yiddish word. The Hebrew word for it is kippah. So it is not a holy item. In fact, it's much more cultural. People wear it because it shows a sign of reverence to God. It also has become sort of a way of expressing yourself Jewishly. So I wear it, especially when I'm doing something like this, or I'm in my synagogue teaching, because I want people to be aware that Jews exist. Some communities, different styles, like I would yin yang right now. Yesterday I matched my kippah to my shirt, so that I wanted to look good. I used to match in my tie, I was told to stop doing that. I have like over 250 of them, so I have any Grateful Dead fans here? I have a steely face.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of different ways of doing it. It is a sign of reverence, and it is a sign of community. It's not a holy item. We have a lot of things that we wear that are prescribed ritually that are holy. I'm not wearing them tonight because this wouldn't be the forum for it. But this is just, it's something that has become part of the culture. And my guess is, we're desert people. So we probably covered our heads a lot. And when we went out into the rest of the world, the head covering just became a natural thing. And then became associated, so we adopted this as our own thing. But I don't know the history because it doesn't come up until much later in the Jewish tradition, and by then it's already sort of canonized as this is what Jews do. Some people wear them all the time. I wear mine most of the time. Some people never wear them at all.
It's interesting though, because as I grew up in a Mennonite, my Amish, my grandmother wore a covering, where they wore prayer hats as Mennonite women. And we didn't think a big thing. And then when the Muslims were coming in and living in Carmel, and one of the women had a hijab, which was a covering, some people went crazy. There's this woman with this thing covering over her head. What is it? You know, and I was like, okay, I mean, we were covering, you know, it's not that big a deal. But somehow, because they thought this again was a stereotype, she was, you know, going to blow up something. So, I mean, you realize when you watch all these, and I love NCIS, I love all these Homeland, I love all these TV shows, but you know, they have a certain perspective on certain groups of people that get ingrained, and we have to really watch that. So, all right, so let's open it up. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you, and then stand up and just introduce yourself. Give us your first name and give us your question, okay? So would somebody like to ask a question to our group? We got about a half hour. So yes, please stand up and.
Hi, I'm Holly.
Hi, Holly.
Hi. You mentioned that you pray 5 times a day. Then you use the word meditate to refer to that prayer. And in Buddhist teachings, we meditate. And I don't consider, when I meditate, I don't consider that a prayer. Are those two things the same thing? A meditation and a prayer?
That's a very good question. In my mind, they are, but somebody else may disagree. But in my mind, what is meditation? Meditation is focusing on in my life, focusing on divine. Just trying to get out of your body, get out of your day-to-day struggles, and try to relax. And I feel like when Muslims pray, when I pray, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to focus my mind towards God and trying to relax and trying to connect with the divine.
And you know, and it's interesting because mindfulness has been a word now. And in the Christian tradition, Paul says, pray ceaselessly. There is something about praying, that prayer is a way of kind of living in mindfulness. Go ahead. And
Sure, I'd like to address that as well.
Stand up,
because,
stand up, stand up.
I'm older than you.
Hey, I'll do it.
But also, what we often emphasize is meditation. But what I try to say is that meditation is familiarizing your mind with what is good and wholesome that will move you in the right direction. You can do formal meditation where you're focused on a particular thought or idea, cherishing others, recognizing the preciousness of your human life. You have a thought, an idea, and you stay with that. So it basically marinates your mind with what is good and wholesome. So out of the formal meditation session, you can actually practice what you meditated on. But going to this idea of mindfulness, we are actually meant to meditate all day long, because meditation means holding what is positive, thoughtful, what is going to lead you in the right direction. We need to not only do that in formal meditation, we need to do that out of meditation. And when I do normal drop-in classes, I don't talk a whole lot about prayer, because I think that's a unique feature of any faith or religion. So when I do a drop-in class, especially like here, we don't do a prayer. But if you come to the center, we have a prayer that we do before we begin a teaching or meditation. Because at the center, it's appropriate. You know, because then people know they're going to a Buddhist place and there's going to be Buddhist prayers. So there are actually a lot of Buddhist prayers. And the thing is, prayer and meditation are not different. Because meditation is meant to move your mind to what is good and wholesome. Prayer serves the same function. Meditation is a mental action and intention that moves you in a particular direction, creates karma, and so does your prayer. So your prayer by its nature is meant to be good and wholesome, and if you're saying a prayer, you are actually meditating. The other thing that's important about that is that what we understand is that, again, this idea that prayer has to be one with your life. It needs to be holding us throughout the entire day. So again, I think it's just usually a drop-in class that won't necessarily, engage in a prayer, but at the center, we have lots of prayers that we do.
And this is what I love about learning of other faiths. I'm not going to become Buddhist, but it enhances my faith. And I learn, and I love the teaching of Buddha. I mean, they're very similar with the teachings of Jesus in many ways. So we come to find a lot of commonality. George, do you want to say?
Well, I was going to say something about that same sort of concept of prayer, meditation.
Okay.
Sure. So Jews have a lot of prayers, and we don't pray for everything.
Good.
Seriously. Google Jewish prayer for going to the bathroom. You will not be surprised. And we have a prayer for everything. And there's a rubric of prayer, and that's called keva. It's sort of the functionality of prayer. It's Baruch atah Adonai. It's the saying of the words. And the worst thing that happened to Jewish prayer is they created a prayer book. Because now we have this canon of prayer that we do. But the other half of prayer is kavanah, which is intention. It's what's going on in your head. So there are people who say the words, but they have no meaning. And there are people who find deep meaning and don't care about the words. Like they're praying the prayers of their heart, and that happens in Judaism. And blending the two together is how you get a prayer service. And so keva and kavanah are always we're trying to get them together. Now, when I do prayer, it's very different from the person standing next to me doing prayer. They're the same words. That person might not even know what they're saying if they're saying it in Hebrew. But there's this intention of getting something out of it. And so that's part of that same sort of connection. And is prayer meditation, is meditation prayer? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's how it feeds you and how it connects you to whatever you're trying to connect to that is considered divine.
Great. Okay? Yes, please stand up.
Doug, you're memorized too, like the Jewish prayers.
Sure, so the question is, are the 5 prayers similar, different, are they memorized, the structure? So Muslims, as I said, we're supposed to pray 5 times a day. These prayers are basically a repetition of a set of in Arabic verses from the Quran. So there are certain verses in the Quran that Muslims recite every time, multiple times when we pray. So for example, early morning, I'm supposed to do 2 repetitions of the same prayer. At lunchtime, I'm supposed to do 4 repetitions of the same prayer. Afternoon, another 4. Evening, 3. Night, 4. So it's a combination of Arabic verses from the Quran plus our own language. We can pray in our own language as we want. But another difference is that Muslims are supposed to pray in a very structured way. So before the prayer, I'm supposed to wash my hands, my face, my arms, make sure my clothes are clean. So I'm thinking nowadays with coronavirus, I don't think Muslims can get a corona. We're supposed to wash our hands and face 5 times a day, which kind of get difficult sometimes. But so prayers are very structured. We're supposed to face a certain way. We're supposed to kneel down. We're supposed to touch our head to the ground, make sure we have a clean space to pray. Very structured, very based on time, exact times, that's when we should be praying. And if we are at work or traveling or doing something we can't get out of, we can pray later as well. So there's a prescribed time, but then there is some leniency to, depending on what we're doing, to change it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, good. Please, please.
Yeah, okay. Hi.
Say your name.
Allie. Hi. So I'm a teacher, so I was just curious about like when do children start practicing? So when do they pray if they're at school? Like do schools typically accommodate for that? And then also like for fasting, at what age do they begin to do that?
So for praying, Muslim kids are encouraged to start praying at 8. Again, there's no set age, but around that age. That's when kids are encouraged to start praying with their parents. Parents are encouraged to grab their kids and just stand and pray with them, even when they don't memorize or don't remember the verses. They just follow the movements. So kids usually start praying at around 8, and after, in their teenage years, that's when they're encouraged, really encouraged to start praying regularly. High schools, some high schools do have that facility where there's a meditation room or a prayer room, and kids are allowed to go there. I don't know, I didn't go to school here, but my kids tell me that some kids do make those arrangements where they can go and pray for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But as I said, kids can wait till the end of the school, come home, and then pray. And fasting is the same thing. Kids are supposed, basically adults are supposed to fast. So kids shouldn't be fasting. And again, when adults who are really old, if they feel difficult to fast because of health conditions, or women when they're pregnant or nursing, they don't have to fast. And you said you're a teacher. I thought you look more like a student.
Okay, back here, then here, what? Go ahead, stand.
I'm Hannah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. What would you say would be the position of women within the beginnings of your religion and today?
In all of these different traditions? Okay, this could be a short answer.
Yeah, of course.
Stand up. Stand up.
It's hilarious.
Good question.
So early on in Judaism, the separation of men's roles and women's roles was pretty clear. Still exists today in some communities, some Orthodox communities. Women are separated even during prayer. So women are either behind a wall or a fence or up in a balcony above the men. That's not true of the vast majority of Jews today. Women and men are together. There are women rabbis. I have a women rabbi. I know more women rabbis than men rabbis right now who I call really close friends. But there's ancient history that women actually had leadership roles in the Jewish tradition. We're finding some archaeological evidence that women may have had a pretty big role. But for the most part, women, for early on, were separated. for a whole lot of reasons that I won't go into, but it was clearly an attempt to create valued roles for both that don't make sense in the contemporary world, but in the ancient world it would have. Except they didn't let women be Kohanim and Levi, and they didn't work in the temple, which is tragic, but you know, try to clean up.
Okay.
So women in Islam, you see Muslim women, some Muslim women cover their head, most don't. So it's a general guideline. My wife, when we were in Pakistan, she used to cover her head because her dad really liked that. But once we moved here, she did not.
So a lot of that was cultural,
It
right?
was cultural.
Cultural.
Because dad said, you better do that. And
Yeah.
she said, okay.
Okay.
I will. But Prophet Muhammad, 1400 years ago in Middle East, women had no rights. Rich men had hundreds of wives. Women were not given any share in the inheritance of their parents. So Prophet Muhammad said, that's not right. So he put a limit that you cannot marry more than 4 women, but maybe just one, because you'll not be able to have equity or do justice to all 4. But there is a possibility, so we put a limit. It's a speed limit. It's not an option to go 4. We said no 100 or 1,000 wives. If you're really some celebrity or something, okay, you can do 4. But for majority of the men, 1 will be it. Muslim mosques, when you go and see how the Muslim mosques look like, so they usually have a separation. Women are in one room, men are in a separate room, or if the 2 rooms are not available, then men are in the front, women are in the back.
But I think it's important because there's a perception that women are oppressed in Islam. And because Saudi Arabia maybe has it where women have just been able to drive. That's a cultural thing.
Yes.
Because in Bosnia or in India, those are not the core teachings of Muhammad. Like you said, Muhammad was an advocate for women just like Jesus was. Now, only men right now have been imams, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so the imam is like a priest or a minister, but men are right now so far that way.
There are some Muslim groups now forming, mostly in the West, where there are some Muslim imams, female imams as well. But
Okay.
99% of
Right.
all Muslim
Right.
imams are men.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And what do you think is the biggest Muslim country in the world?
Indonesia.
There you go.
there
Most people think of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
No. Most of the Muslims are in Asia, they're not in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so in Indonesia, has had a woman leader.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
several Muslim countries.
Yeah,
Yes,
several
not
Muslim
just
countries
that.
have a woman, yes. Woman's role in the Buddhist tradition?
I think it's a really, really important question, and it's hard to give it real justice in just a few minutes. I think the important thing to understand is that, like what I've heard already, there was nothing inherent in Buddhist teachings to discriminate against women. In fact, Buddha's mother and his former wife became disciples of Buddha in his lifetime. However, because of cultural discrimination, even in Buddhism, there was discriminated against. And one of the things I find really important is that in the tradition that we have, our teacher is Kelsang. He's come to the West in 1977, and he understood how we could benefit from Buddhist teachings, but not from Buddhist culture. We need to adopt Buddhist teachings to our own culture. And he removed all the discrimination, gender discrimination, discriminations against monks and nuns, because I grew up Catholic. Catholic nuns were not treated as well as priests, you know, and the same thing in some Buddhist traditions, nuns were not allowed to teach, they're not treated as well, and a lot of sort of second class. And quite frankly, that would not be appealing to me. So one of the things that I've been involved in other Buddhist traditions when I met this one, the thing that I really liked about it is that our teacher understands that it's Buddhist teachings that are important, not cultural political concerns. So he's removed all the cultural and political concerns, and that there is absolutely no discrimination between a monk or a nun, a layperson or ordained person, a man or a woman, was no concern about someone's gender identification or their affectionate preferences. So it fits what I think is modern point of view. And it's not changing Buddhist teachings, because it's never been part of Buddhist teachings, but it's changing culturally. So right now we have a spiritual director who is an Irish female Buddhist nun. I think it's fantastic.
Well, and I would suggest that exactly, Jesus' teachings was about elevating women. Culture has changed, and men have been in roles within the church, and because men, the patriarchalness of our church has created doctrines, but that's evolving. My wife's a minister. She's been for 35 years. In our denomination, a lot of denominations are evolving, and I think it's very important that we are seeing God is opening us up to a greater consciousness. So we hear this language, I'm spiritual but not religious, or I'm spiritual and religious. And that means I'm religious out of my context, but I see God in a much greater way than just who I am. Now, I did want to, if you had or not, you're going to be our last question.
Okay. I was just wondering, what is the role of children in your guys' religion?
Great.
You know, is there certain things that kids do as they grow? Like, for example, in Catholics, there's 7 sacraments. As you grow older, you might experience them. Is there certain things children?
Yeah, I mean.
So the question is, what role do children play in your tradition? So
They keep me important.
they keep them going.
That's their most important role, and I tell them that every week. So we have life cycle events. So the first one for boys is at 8 days. It's probably the most traumatic. It's circumcision. So they do. I'll stand up. So it's a circumcision,
Right.
and that's when they get their name and actually are welcomed into the Jewish people. For girls, we developed a ritual called the baby name, so there's no surgery involved. And they just get their name. So every Jew has their vernacular name. Mine's George, but we also have a Hebrew name. Mine's Yaakov, which is Jacob. And so we get that name for boys. It's at 8 days. We've stolen some things from the Christian tradition in the last 120 or so years. So we consecrate our kids when they first go to learn, when they first start going to religious school. So we have a consecration service. When a child turns 13, they become bar bat mitzvah, which means child of the commandments, where they now take over their own spiritual development, if you will. That's how one person put it in a document I was reading yesterday. So they are now responsible for developing their own sense of Judaism. Up to that point, their parents, and quite frankly me, help them develop their spiritual development. We also, in some Jewish traditions, we do confirmation when kids are older, and that's a group thing that we do in 10th grade. And so then you become, then you're a teenager and you move on. But those are sort of the ways we do it. We don't call them sacraments. They're just milestones along the way. The most important one, of course, is bar and bat mitzvah. And the bat mitzvah is 100 years old. That's for girls. 100 years ago, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein was asked by her father, Mordecai, if she would become the first bat mitzvah in a small little synagogue in New York City. I met Judith Kaplan Eisenstein. She's no longer with us, but I met her before she died. So it hasn't been that long. But for boys, it's been going on since ancient times.
So role of kids in Islam, the circumcision, just like Jews, boys, Muslim boys, we go through that. When kids are growing up, they learn to read the Holy Quran, which is in Arabic. So a lot of Muslim kids, like 7, 8, 9, 10 years, in that time frame, they start reading the entire of the Holy Quran. That's a tradition that Muslims have. But there are really no other sacred sacraments or set defined things that kids go through. It's really learning how to pray, read the entire Quran. Some kids do try to memorize the Holy Quran, but that takes years to do that. But some kids do. The kids are amazing. The younger the kids are, the quicker they can memorize. Okay, good, right.
And then, so within some ethnic Buddhist traditions, there might be some things, but I'm really not aware of that at all. In our center, in our tradition, we try to offer family meditation. So families get together, they learn about meditation, they learn about a little bit about prayers, and then they actually engage in activities that are meant to promote, loving kindness, care. So early on, you're trying to learn good values. But again, that's just how we do it, because it's a little bit of a different approach, and you have to realize Buddhism is quite new in the West here, and quite new, and it is still evolving as such. But mainly what I think about is that if the parents are able to purify their mind, develop a sense of well-being, peace, that's the best thing that they can offer and teach their children. So one time somebody said, well, what book can I give my child that would help them? I said, you are the book. And then if you practice, if you are purifying your mind, you're engaging in positive actions, your kids will naturally begin to move in that direction, and best help that we can give them.
Well, we want to be true to our time, so as we wrap this up, let me just say a couple things if you want further information, because we don't have our emails to hear that, but I'm the pastor at Carmel Christian Church. You just Google Carmel Christian Church, and email me at the church. I will respond if you want one of us to come and speak as a teacher to some group. Some of you are up for Anderson, and if you want the library there at Anderson, we will continue to do this. I'm the president of the Carmel Interfaith Alliance. Muzaffar is the Fishers Interfaith, the multi-faith alliance of Fishers. But if you go on Facebook, Carmel, Interfaith Alliance and Fisher we have a Facebook page, and we have some speakers there who've done other presentations. But if you would just like to make connection with somebody, I can make that connection for you, or however we can be, because I really believe, as you have found, we have so much more in common. And the more that we can understand about people who we never had a chance to meet, we can find ways of bringing peace. Because it really is in our time today. It's more important now than ever, because we feel so divided in our world that if we can be peacemakers, and in all of our traditions we feel that. So we thank you, Richard, for inviting us.
Thank you.
Okay. And a kind of a closing thing that I like to do, I want you to stand up, all of us stand up, and I want you to repeat after me. I may be black, I may be white, I may be wild, I may be uptight, but I am God's child. I may be rich, I may be poor, I may be exciting. Come on now. I may be exciting. I may be a bore, but I am God's child. I may be Christian. I may be Muslim. I may be Jewish. I may be Hinduish. But I am God's child. Mistreated, unseated, but never defeated. Because I am. Because I am. Because I am God's child. Whose child? Whose child? Tell somebody beside you they are God's child. Thank you for coming.